A very good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate on NTV. Charles Mongo Shampagi. Tonight, with me in the studio, let me first introduce the people that I have in the studio. Welcoming back Melina Platus Izama. Melina, very nice to have you.
Thank you so much.
Melina is a PhD political science student.
That's correct.
She's been a journalist for some time in Uganda and keen on social issues.
Absolutely.
Very nice to have you.
Thank you.
Morrison Wakakamba. Morrison, we've had you when you were working with Twaweza.
Yes.
That's many years ago.
For sure.
We had you when you were working, now you work for the president,
Yes.
but you also lead the Agency for Transformation.
For sure.
Very nice to have you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you.
And welcoming back Chris Obore, who was absent last week with poor health. Chris, very nice to have you tonight.
Thank you.
How are you feeling now?
It was a temporal health inconvenience.
You know, sometimes people worry in the industry in which you and I work that if you complain of those temporal health inconveniences, people begin thinking maybe there's something serious happening to you.
You shouldn't always think about what Satan is planning. You plan what you think is good.
Great. We will continue tonight with the discussion we started last week on social security and the pension sector reform in this country. And I'm reading from a paper, a policy paper issued by Agency for Transformation, which Morrison works for, called Uganda Pension Liberalization, Will Workers' Money Be Safe? And I want to quote from it. It says, going by both anecdotal and available experimental evidence, the most plausible motive behind the bill, this is the pension sector reform bill, to liberalize social security in Uganda could be the low-hanging fruit that National Social Security Fund is, period. That's what Morrison believes. We had a debate last week with Asha Wilson-Owere, who heads NOTU, NOTU, the National Organization of Trade Unions of Uganda, and Dr. Fred Muhumuza from the Economic Policy Research Center. Let me start with Morrison. You have written a very elaborate paper on the pension sector reform and your views about this. People are concerned. The government says it needs to reform the pension sector, guarantee Ugandans, because it has seen Ugandans as some of the most indisciplined people when it comes to saving and managing their finances. Someone cashes out their pension or their NSSF savings, and within a couple of years, they have run broke. Why do you think that the only plausible motive is the low-hanging fruit that NSSF is in your analysis of this bill?
Yeah, it's because social security is part of the wider social protection. And our ideological position on this is that social security is about people. It's about everyday people, and it can only be guaranteed by government. And that if you put savers' money on the open market, you see, by private investors, whose preoccupation and why they do business is absolutely about profit, then they are going to put that money into tactical investments. And as you know, things like stocks are like, you know, a nest of eggs. And once it collapses, you can save for 30 years, 40 years chance, and then after that you don't have money. So we still do believe that the NSSF should be saved, okay, to continue taking mandatory contributions from the savers.
But
and government bureaucracy should keep an eye on NSSF. So what we are calling for at the Agency for Transformation is reforming NSSF to work for real people, to have products like health insurance.
Why are you uncomfortable,
and also
Morrison?
Strengthen regulation.
Yes, why are you uncomfortable with the liberalized pension sector? Because you cannot keep NSSF's monopoly and think that you're doing Ugandan workers a favor.
No. The NSSF monopoly that we want is on correction of mandatory contribution from savers. But we are saying, by the way, even now, you know, pension sector in Uganda, in a way, is already liberalized because there are many pension funds that are running in this country. But we want, you see, it's about a mandate. Let me give you an example. It's like you see the Uganda police. Its mandate is to keep law and order, okay? And it retains that mandate, gets resources from the consolidated fund. But it did not stop the creation of all these security firms that you see across the country that are keeping, you know, that are standing on people's gates. So we are saying those other pension funds
can come and operate
without
occupying the space.
Without occupying the space of the mandatory contribution of
Chris,
NSSF.
In a country where the argument were rising last week was in a country where government has failed to manage its own pensions, that's the money that gets more stolen And some of the pensioners in this country are some of the most miserable people. You find someone has worked, has held a very high profile position in government, in the academia, has served government for 20, 30 years. They retire and they have nothing to retire on, which actually has increased corruption in government, as some people have told us. What is your own opinion on this proposed reform of the pension sector, where, for example, they will give you 30%, the new bill proposes that they give you 30% of your savings, and then the balance, the 70%, is given to you on a calculated amount that comes to you every end of month for your lifetime.
Oh, I'm glad that you're able to bring this element when our colleague who believes in the NRM, Morrison, is here. And I'm also glad that he's now at the forefront of opposing the opening up of that sector, especially the interference with the way NSSF is run. But I don't want us to discuss NSSF in isolation.
We're actually discussing the broader
yes.
social security sector.
Yes, NSSF suffers what every other sector suffered, and that is state capture. That the state is not operating. The individuals have taken over the state and make decisions on behalf of the state. And unfortunately, the consequences are what we are beginning to discuss. And before we even say it is wrong to open up NSSF, have we understood the national development policy in this country? What is it? The last I checked, through the National Development Plan, which is housed at the National Planning Authority, Uganda's development policy is to run a private sector-led economy. So now, if that is the position of the NRM government that Morrison supports so much, I am now wondering whether he is beginning to see the weaknesses in the system that he supports. And one of those weaknesses I must put categorically today before Morrison is, as a country called Uganda, before we talk about NSSF, we talked about UCB and got tired. Soon we shall talk about UPE and get tired. We will talk about health and get tired. The genesis of this trouble is the country is run through ideological anarchy.
What exactly?
The NRM government has no clear and robust ideology on which they are pretending to run this country. So what you're seeing, it is neither here, neither there, it is experimentalism. And now, when you are doing experiments on the livelihoods of citizens, you expect laughter.
But if you look at Morrison's paper here, it's actually not experimentalism.
But
he uses the analogy, he uses this image of a low-hanging fruit.
Exactly.
NSSF is a fund of 4.3 trillion Uganda shillings.
I want to see the ground to Melina. You are using Morrison's paper. But Morrison is an ardent supporter of the NRM government. And the NRM government policy is private sector-led economy.
Can I pitch in?
Now,
you're coming most on the moment.
Can I pitch in? Private sector-led growth, but with regulation.
No, economy.
It's a regulated market.
Hold in.
So the issue of regulation is very important.
Hold in.
It's not.
Make your point, because you wanted to ground to Melina, and I need to draw Melina into the debate.
When you want to bring in the state,
it's as if it's unfettered liberalization. No. It is liberalization with regulation. And Chris, you have to understand that.
It is not liberalization.
And what we are calling for in this paper is a regulated pension sector.
Hold it, both of you. Hold it, both of you. Chris, hold it right there. Melina, let me.
Regulation, no regulation, the state.
No.
And I had him already the other day.
The market has
hold it, both of you there. Hold it right there.
First,
Melina,
get out of the ideological anarchy, and then you talk about development.
If you look at other markets and how they manage social security protection, social security rather, what is wrong with the approach that this bill is bringing into discussion, because I see two fundamental issues. The people at the Ministry of Finance are keen to have this bill run through as fast as possible. But there are many voices that are calling for caution. They're saying, look, are you actually interested in reforming Social Security, or are you interested in getting your hands on the money where government doesn't contribute? If you look at the American experience, you have there are many systems. Is it 415 something? There are many schemes that provide Social Security. In Europe, across Europe, they have robust Social Security systems that guarantee a good life for people once they reach retirement, because they have invested their energies working either for government or in the private sector when they're still strong.
Yes. Well, I think there's two things we're looking at here. One is NSSF and the money that is already there, which is a very large amount of money. Then the other thing is Social Security as a concept. What is Social Security? As Morrison said, we think of Social Security as protection for the future, for some future point in your life, after you've retired perhaps, where you need to have some kind of money to rely on to live, and you're not working anymore, so you're not getting a regular income. Now the thing is, in this particular country, in this economy, the people who are benefiting from the NSSF scheme are a very small number of people. And in fact, I would argue these are the elite. These are people who work for formal industry, formal businesses, the formal sector. These are the people who are actually least likely to be in trouble as an older person. That's the first thing. The second thing is the premise of Social Security is that you're mandating that people contribute something for the future, because they may not do it for themselves if you don't mandate that they do it, which may put a burden on the state later in time if they decide to spend all their money up front and then they have nothing later. But here, things like healthcare, which would be one of the primary expenses of an older person, is meant to be free, meant to be available for everyone, regardless of whether you're old and you have money or you're old and you don't have money. You're supposed to be able to access healthcare. Now, I would also argue, assuming that with a functioning Social Security system or a functioning NSSF where you get your money upon retirement, say you get 20 million. But you're still living in this country with this health system, and if you haven't actually worked on the health sector, for example, your 20 million may actually not help you at all, and you may spend that entire thing going to India, for example.
And you see,
I wouldn't even treat you.
Like Melina is putting it.
Yes.
Social protection is a very wider concept. It's ideally meant to take care of vulnerabilities of each and every individual. And if you are talking about the vulnerability, they are diverse. But in this case, it's restricted especially to those who lack a means of livelihood. And you're talking about the children, you're talking about the disabled, you're talking about the elderly, you're talking about such groups of people. For those who are working, they say they remove from them. But even those who are not working, they deserve to be socially protected. And this is where issues of ideological orientation matter. In our case, if we have said that each and every individual deserves to be socially protected, then we ask ourselves a question: who is in the right place to protect each and every individual? You realize, Charles, that the state, and mark my word, the state becomes a duty bearer. But in a situation where a duty bearer says, my policy of dispensing my duties is through private sector-led development, what social protection do you anticipate?
Morrison.
Chaos.
Let's come back to your concerns about this. If you have, like Melina says, the basic infrastructure for social protection hasn't been worked on. After the break, we'll be switching to discussing the latest Uwezo report. Are our children learning? And the results are grim. For a third year running, the results are grim. You're not preparing these children. Now, if we stick to this, yes, because social protection is about the education you give to these children to be able to fend for themselves, plan, and effectively be able to take care of their offsprings. Social protection is about the healthcare systems you put in place. Social protection is about infrastructure, other infrastructure that enables people to be able to build the kind of buffers around themselves that they can live a more decent life. How do you talk to me about this compulsory contribution from workers? 500,000 Ugandans contribute to NSSF.
I think, Charles, you should be a lecturer. Thanks for the lecture. But let me tell you, you see, social security or social benefits in terms of pension, we are looking at what we call old age replacement income. We are here, we're still young, we can work. And we only, government applies of, mandatory 5%, and I think employers also add the other, 10%. So it becomes,
yes, you need to know that
15%.
the employers factor that 10% into your salary.
Yeah, and that happens, until when you no longer have the energy to work. So it is very imperative that this kind of money, this saving is really not put on the private sector market. And why do you save that money? It's not because, by the way, you want the interest rate or you want the dividend or you want profit. It's not an investment. You see,
It could be.
It is supposed to be.
Let me finish my point.
Yes.
You can call it an investment, but I am saving, for the future. And for me, that's the ideology of social security. But once you open it up, and then it looks at, it's actually looked at as an avenue for people who want to make profits. Not for you, but actually for themselves. And that's why some of us are opposed to investment banks and these short-term financing mechanisms, derivatives, and futures. If we open up that are going to come here in order to utilize this money, and they may invest it in markets where we don't have control. And like I told you, you can save for 30 years, and you hear that the market in Hong Kong has collapsed, and your money goes, and then you begin litigation process. You are in court when you are really very old. So this is why we say the only guarantor, you see, of those savings of yours, your sister and everybody else, can only be government. We cannot allow private sector to be in charge of this very important. And by the way, it also has a national security. It also has a national security issue that you have these savings, like what happened in America when pension funds that were investing so much on stock markets, and those stock markets collapsed. You have got populations, our seniors, you see, who have saved for a long time and they cannot access their savings. You will have a political crisis if those guys get on the streets. Medina raised a very important point. You have only 370 people who are saving under the NSSF scheme. We need to reform the NSSF to say, how can we cover millions of Ugandans, those who are in circles, those who are farmers who are earning certain money? If you're selling 20 cows or 10 cows or 1 cow a year, let 2% be mandatorily saved into NSSF, such that in case of all these risks, you see, when you are old, when you are a senior,
doesn't that raise
the
contradiction
you can access that money?
How can the same government, you as a supporter and as an intellectual brain in the government now, working with the president, with the president's office, that on one hand you're saying liberalization is okay, on the other, liberalizing the social security sector is problematic.
Okay, let me mention that the ideology of this government is really a private sector-led economy, but it's actually, do you know what Keynes said? It's a mix of market-led but also command economy, and command economy comes into regulation. Even when you have private sector, do you allow it unfettered to do whatever they want, or you must regulate it? And let me give you an example.
If you strengthen regulation,
let me give you an example. There are certain things that private sector cannot do. Private sector cannot build railways, cannot build roads. Private sector
manage the energy sector.
There is what they call public good. Government is the guarantor of public good. And I look at social security and social protection as a private good.
Let's give a minute to Chris and a minute to Melina. Can you sit down, Morrison? We give a minute to Chris and a minute to Melina.
I get Morrison's concerns.
And then I conclude.
I clearly get his concerns. But it's coming from the policy framework. No, the policy is wrong, which is correct. But he is not admitting, first of all, that the NRM government he serves does not say the ideology is this or that. They are saying theirs is multi-ideological. So that means theirs is nothing. You cannot place what is ideology.
Multi can't be nothing.
Where did you get that from?
That's what they say. That theirs is multi, and yet
it is Sunday evening. Why are you telling me?
Can you hold it? And yet the documents I've seen, their put is private sector-led economy. Challenge them in the public and say, what is your ideology? Ours is multi-ideological. But now they are being to get trapped in their own ideological anarchy. I told you that if you are not clear, you always find yourself like a drunk person. Don't know whether you are moving forward or backward.
It is liberalization.
Your 1 minute is actually running out.
No, Morrison is interfering with it. Don't allow him to sum up then. So the issue is you are raising the issue of a policy, which is legitimate. But within the policy issues you are raising, There are governance issues.
Thank you.
Now,
Melina.
NSSF, Charles, is one of the most poorly governed institutions in this country. Every other time, government deposits their self-seekers for purposes of spawning money what others have worked for.
That's the low-hanging fruit you were talking
very
about.
dangerous.
Melina, you have 30 seconds
Yes,
because he's eaten into
which
your
is really
minute.
unfair.
Very
I'm
unfair.
getting a very short end of the stick here. So Chris brings up an important point. How do you recruit quality people into NSSF? Whatever form it takes after this. The problem is for successive periods of time, you have MDs or other people who have been prosecuted, who wouldn't, if you're a serious person and you don't want to get prosecuted, you probably won't go there. So you have to find a way to make it a place that quality people want to work. Another thing, I completely agree that ideally, with what Morrison was saying, ideally we would expand Social Security so that you provide, you collect from more people to help them save for the future, and you provide quality services. However, I don't see how this is possible at this point in time. I would love to hear how it's possible, but if you have a situation in which you cannot tax people, for example, you struggle to get 2,000 shillings from people, I can't imagine how you're going to get them to give you something.
Perfectly.
Especially when given the healthcare sector, they may actually not live to see that time.
Okay.
Why would they give you
The
something?
370 million talks
Unfortunately,
about are already suffering.
I know
So you
Morrison
expand the
has been
suffering of
tapping me to
others.
give him a few seconds.
Thank you
But
very much.
we have a short time. No. We're going to take the break. Maybe we'll have
Okay,
that opportunity
for
in the
sure,
next,
for sure.
when we'll be discussing a different
I'm
issue, which
ready
is the
to
Wezo
better.
Yeah,
report. We'll
no,
be right
that
back.
ideology.